Did you know a single genetic deviation once plunged the entire world into ruin? Before the great deluge that reset civilization, there was a shocking truth hidden in the shadows of the ancient world. The existence of the Nephilim, the biblical giants, was not just a footnote in history. It was the catastrophic catalyst for divine judgment. These beings weren't mythical. They were the terrifying physical manifestation of a forbidden union that nearly wiped humanity off the map. But here is the chilling question. If the history books claim they were eradicated by the flood, why do archaeological finds and global myths scream otherwise? What is the dark secret surrounding their reappearance? And why is this ancient struggle the very key to understanding the spiritual warfare you are fighting today? Join us as we uncover the true story of the Nephilim, a truth that guarantees you'll never read Genesis the same way again. The true horror of the Nephilim is rooted in a celestial mutiny that predates the flood. We trace this crisis back to Genesis 6:4, a single passage detailing the ultimate betrayal of cosmic trust. Imagine the scene. A select group of high-ranking angels, known in ancient texts as the Watchers, were commissioned to guard and observe humanity. Yet driven by an unholy lust and a wicked desire for dominion, they broke ranks. This was the original situation that doomed the pre-flood world. These immortal beings, the sons of God, looked down upon the beautiful but fragile daughters of men. And in a profound act of spiritual and physical treason they descended. They abandoned their designated spiritual realm, violating the sacred boundary between the divine and the mortal, to force an unnatural union. This was the moment the heavenly order shattered, and chaos was physically introduced to earth. Their wicked objective was immediately realized in the birth of the Nephilim. These were not simply tall individuals. They were towering, brutal, and genetically corrupted hybrids monsters who inherited the supernatural power of their angelic fathers and the physical form of their human mothers. They were the situation themselves, living nightmares. Scripture describes them as mighty men, men of renown. But imagine the terror this title commanded. These giants imposed their unnatural dominance on the weak, spreading unchecked violence, cannibalism, and forbidden dark knowledge, altering the course of human culture and plunging it into depravity. The situation on earth devolved into a state of continuous, inescapable evil, as recorded in Genesis 6:5. This contamination was systemic, a deliberate demonic strategy to create an unredeemable bloodline, thereby preventing the eventual pure human lineage necessary for the coming Messiah. The Nephilim were Satan's masterstroke, a physical biological block against salvation. This massive and deliberate spiritual warfare effort against God's plan. This situation of complete genetic and moral collapse is why the divine architect was left with only one choice: the devastating world-cleansing deluge. The terrifying reality of the Nephilim was the catalyst for annihilation. The flood came fulfilling its terrifying promise. We know from Genesis 7:23 that every living thing on the face of the earth was destroyed. Only Noah and his family remained. Logically, the Nephilim, the original corrupted hybrids, should have been utterly wiped out. The global cleansing was meant to reset the timeline, eliminate the genetic contamination, and restore order. But here lies the greatest mystery of the giant narrative, the one that scholars refuse to fully confront. How did the giants return? The Bible itself drops a terrifying clue in Genesis 6:4, where the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also after that. This small, seemingly innocuous phrase changes everything. It suggests that the supernatural root of the contamination was not fully eradicated by the water. The question isn't if they returned, but how the seed of Nephilim corruption survived the greatest judgment in history. The first shocking evidence of their reappearance comes hundreds of years later, when Moses sent 12 spies into the promised land of Canaan. The spies returned paralyzed by fear, their mission shattered by what they saw. In Numbers 13:33 they report, "There we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight." The Anakim, The Anak's descendants were direct remnants of the pre-flood lineage. They were so massive that the Israelite spies, hardened warriors themselves, felt physically insignificant like insects. This encounter created a massive crisis of faith, showing that God's people were facing physical embodiments of the ancient wicked defiance. These were not just tall men. They were the return of the ancient horror. The biblical text confirms this persistence repeatedly. Deuteronomy 2:10-11 refers to other terrifying giant tribes inhabiting the region, the Emim and the Rephaim. The dreadful ones described as tall and numerous as the Anakim. So how did they bypass the flood's annihilation? Multiple theories address this post-flood Nephilim problem, each more fascinating than the last. One speculation is that the corruption was passed down through the bloodline of Ham, Noah's son, whose descendants settled in Canaan. Another more supernatural theory suggests that the sons of God, fallen angels, repeated their original transgression after the flood, perhaps in smaller, more contained geographical regions, resulting in a second localized wave of hybrid births. The purpose remained the same: to corrupt and control the lands God had promised to Israel. The very existence of these post-flood giants inhabiting the strongholds of Canaan turned the promised land into a terrifying battleground. This wasn't merely a territorial war. It was a continuation of the primal war between God's order and the persistent seed of angelic corruption, proving that the spiritual stakes of Genesis 6 still haunt our world today. The Nephilim had returned, making the conquest of Canaan not just a challenge, but a spiritual mandate to complete the cleansing that the flood began. We must understand that their resurgence transformed the entire history of Israel into a relentless life-or-death confrontation against the ancient darkness. The moment Israel prepared to enter the Promised Land, they realized the conquest was not a simple campaign, but an act of spiritual completion. They were sent not just to claim real estate, but to finish the job the flood began. The land of Canaan was infested with the remnants of the ancient darkness, the post-flood giants. These giants had consolidated their power in heavily fortified cities, turning the territories into a physical representation of the spiritual resistance against God's covenant. This situation elevated the conflict from a local skirmish to the primary battle of the ancient world, the seed of the woman versus the seed of the serpent. Every wall they faced, every Anakim warrior they fought, was a direct attack on their divine destiny. The most shocking example of this primal conflict is found in the story of Og, the king of Bashan. Deuteronomy 3:11 gives us a terrifying, tangible detail about this ruler. His iron bedstead measured over 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. Og was a living, breathing symbol of the Nephilim's defiant survival, ruling over a strategic, fertile territory. His sheer size and imposing kingdom meant that defeating him was not just a military victory. It was a theological necessity. Moses' forces had to physically destroy this last remnant of the original corrupted lineage to clear the way for Israel's inheritance. Og's defeat proved that no amount of physical size, military strength, or ancient lineage could withstand the power of the divine covenant. The crushing of Bashan was a declaration that God's plan superseded the agenda of the giants. Yet the most iconic giant encounter, the one etched into human memory, is the confrontation between David and Goliath. Goliath, standing nearly 9 feet 9 inches tall, was a Philistine champion from Gath, a city known for its giant lineage. He was a direct descendant of the giants, often surrounded by his massive brothers, one of whom famously had 6 fingers and 6 toes on each limb, a potential marker of their corrupted non-human genetics. The entire Israelite army, led by King Saul, was paralyzed by this single individual. They saw Goliath as a physical problem, too big to fight, too strong to overcome. But David, the young shepherd, saw the situation through a spiritual lens. He understood that Goliath was not a man, but the arrogant, uncircumcised embodiment of the ancient spiritual resistance that had plagued the earth since Genesis 6. David's weapon wasn't his sling. His weapon was the covenant power of the living God. He didn't come to duel. He came to declare the end of the giant's rule. David's seemingly impossible victory, a small stone felling a giant, is the ultimate symbolic and literal defeat of the Nephilim's legacy. It teaches us a crucial lesson. The giants we face, whether they are physical, Anakim, or the massive, overwhelming giants of doubt, fear and addiction in our own lives, are not defeated by human strength or logic. They are only conquered when we approach the battlefield with the unwavering spiritual authority of the covenant. The purpose of these stories is clear. They prove that no matter how entrenched the ancient darkness is, no matter how physically imposing the challenge, God provides the power to complete the cleansing and claim the inheritance He promised. The battle for Canaan was the final devastating mop-up operation against the Nephilim, securing the human bloodline necessary for the redemption to come. If the Nephilim were only a localized problem for ancient Israel, why do their terrifying shadows stretch across every continent and civilization? The scale of the giants' influence far exceeded the boundaries of the Promised Land. This leads us to a profound situation: the global persistence of the giant narrative. Across nearly every culture on Earth, from the ancient Greeks to the Native American tribes, there are distinct parallel legends of towering, brutal beings who predated man, corrupted the world, and warred against the gods. These weren't just tall tales, they were cultural memories echoing a singular catastrophic event. The Greeks spoke of the Titans, massive primordial deities, who challenged the Olympian order, mirroring the angelic rebellion of the Watchers. In Norse mythology, the Jotnar were frost giants and mountain dwellers, embodiments of untamed chaos and raw power. Even among the Native American Paiutes, stories persist of the Ka, fierce red-haired giants that they fought and eventually drove from the land. Why this universal memory? It suggests the pre-flood situation of genetic and moral corruption was so pervasive that its memory was carried by Noah's descendants and crystallized into myth across diverse geographical locations. But the evidence doesn't stop with myth. It's carved into the very stone of our planet. The archaeological situation challenges conventional historical timelines. We look at massive megalithic structures that defy human engineering capabilities of their time. Consider the foundations of Baalbek in Lebanon, where stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons, the largest stones ever quarried, were placed with impossible precision. Mainstream historians struggle to explain how pre-industrial humans moved these megaliths. Yet the possibility remains that these were building projects of the Nephilim or their descendants, beings possessing superhuman strength and potentially forbidden advanced knowledge inherited from their angelic fathers. We see a similar mystery at Stonehenge, or even the earliest deeply buried layers of structures like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. These ancient construction feats become instantly explainable if we factor in the existence of giant architects, beings who operated outside the physical limitations of normal man. The most controversial and sensational part of this investigation concerns the purported physical evidence. For centuries, explorers and settlers worldwide have reported the discovery of unusually large human remains, skeletons ranging from 8 feet to 12 feet or more. While many of these reports are dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications, like the remains of mastodons being mistaken for giants, the sheer volume and geographical spread of these accounts create a compelling unresolved situation. Reports from the 19th and early 20th centuries, often published in local American newspapers, detailed the discovery of massive bones, some with strange features, like double rows of teeth or elongated skulls. Potential genetic markers aligning with a hybrid non-human lineage. The critical question for the audience is this: If the Anakim and their kin were physically real as documented in the Bible, and they inhabited lands from Canaan to the surrounding territories, is it logical to assume that every single one of these archaeological reports is false? Or have we been conditioned to reject the possibility of giant artifacts because they fundamentally shatter our accepted understanding of human history and evolution? We are facing a global cover-up by historical revisionism, attempting to erase the memory of the giants who built, corrupted, and dominated the ancient world. The true situation is that the stones still speak, and the myths remember. The ultimate question remains: if the giants were so numerous and powerful, how did they disappear? The biblical narrative shifts from focused battles to a gradual fade-out, implying the Nephilim did not die in one cataclysmic event, but through a prolonged existential situation of systematic warfare. Joshua and David were instruments of a divine mandate to cleanse the land. As we read in Joshua 11:21-22, the Anakim were methodically destroyed utterly with their cities from the hill country. This was a sustained, generations-long spiritual and military campaign designed to eliminate the corrupted bloodline and secure the integrity of the human family tree. The battles against Og the Anakim and Goliath were not random acts of defense. They were surgical strikes aimed at extinguishing the demonic seed that threatened the Messiah's future lineage. Yet, despite these victories, the question of absolute eradication still haunts us. Did every single corrupted individual truly perish, or did some survive to intermingle and hide? This uncertainty opens the door to the most explosive modern situation: the theory of the Nephilim's DNA survival. If these beings were genetic hybrids, part celestial, part human, could that genetic marker, that corrupted DNA strand, have been diluted but not entirely lost? The possibility suggests that the Nephilim were not physically destroyed, but were essentially assimilated, their overwhelming stature and power simply being moderated over time as they bred with non-giant populations. Could the occasional unexplained genetic anomaly or individuals with unusually immense stature be a lingering echo of that ancient unnatural blend? This concept transforms the ancient story into a present-day scientific thriller. This hypothesis leads directly to the core of many modern conspiracy theories. We are asked to consider that the elite powers of the world, those who control global governments and secret societies, may be aware of, or even actively safeguarding this forbidden knowledge. Why would this information be suppressed? Because the rediscovery or re-engineering of the Nephilim lineage, or the knowledge imparted by the original fallen angels, represents the ultimate power over humanity. Some speculate that the very technologies being developed today, particularly those focusing on genetic manipulation and transhumanism, are attempts to recreate the Nephilim hybrid. In this frightening modern situation, mankind, in its hubris, is repeating the exact transgression of the ancient watchers, seeking to cross the line between the natural and the forbidden. Are the current advancements in bioengineering simply a secular scientific attempt to access the secret knowledge that led to the original destruction? This chilling thought turns the Nephilim narrative into a profound real-time warning about the ethical lines we should never cross. The fight against the giants, therefore, has transitioned from a physical war to a spiritual and ethical war. The Nephilim may no longer walk the earth as towering figures, but the spirit of their corruption, the lust for forbidden power, the disregard for divine law, and the attempt to redefine humanity is alive and well. This is the enduring, valuable lesson for the audience. The battle is no longer on the plain of Elah. It's in the quiet, ethical decisions that shape our world and our bodies. The physical giants were defeated, but the spiritual giant of rebellion persists, constantly challenging the divine design for our lives. The saga of the Nephilim is Christ's ultimate warning. When Jesus said, "As the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be," He wasn't just talking about floods. He was referencing the return of an unholy corruption, the very spirit of transgression that birthed the giants. We are living in that shadow now, witnessing the rise of genetic hubris and the global drive to discard God's design. The ancient conflict hasn't ended. It has simply become spiritual. Here's the truth you must confront. The physical giants were defeated, but the spiritual giants are standing over you. They are the massive walls of doubt, the towering figures of addiction, and the paralyzing fear that mock your destiny. You will never win this battle with human strength. Remember David. He saw Goliath not as a threat, but as an uncircumcised challenge to God's covenant. The question isn't whether the giants exist, but whether you have the covenant authority to face them. Stop seeing yourself as a grasshopper. It's time to step onto your personal battlefield and declare the end of the giants' rule. The power that cleansed the ancient world and empowered the shepherd boy is available right now. What is the name of the giant you refuse to surrender?